right, sir. So here we go, back at it again. We're going to go through, get a little bit of a brief background of who you are, kind of set context for the episode, and then we'll jump right into it. So give a quick little introduction. Who are you?
My name's Zeke Meddock. I'm from Spearman, Texas, a little small town, middle of nowhere. Like in the military for 3 years.
Okay.
Regular infantry.
Awesome.
Like, I don't know.
Yeah. So we have kind of a common theme that we're going to end up talking about today. So we both have lost our brothers. So your brother Cameron was a teammate of mine, and we'll kind of jump into that story a little bit later on, and then we'll kind of interweave my brother Tom's story in there as well. So kind of our intent for today is just to kind of catch back up. It's been a little bit of time since I've been able to hang out with you, and we'll kind of just talk on this shared experience that we've gone through over the last couple of years. And hopefully out of that, we can share some of the advice and lessons learned that we've had. So let's just build a little bit more context. So you're from Spearman, Texas. So give us a little bit of history on kind of like what is the culture of Spearman, Texas, and population and everything.
So like the population, there's like a little over 3,000 people, but it's just your typical like Bible Belt, like small town. Everybody knows everybody. Everybody's in everybody's business. You know, just kind of grew up like pretty close community. Like it was nice, like sometimes until like you got in trouble and then your parents found out before you even got home.
Yep.
But like very patriotic. Just kind of good old town, I guess. But yeah, I grew up a lot of military people in our town. Like just farming, oil field, like pretty much all there is.
Just that blue collar way of life, so to say.
Yeah, everyone's blue collar. Well, not everyone, but for the majority.
Now, were you first generation out there, or has your family kind of been rooted out there for a while?
Been out there for a long time.
Okay. So generations grew up in Spearman?
Yeah. Well, not necessarily like in Spearman, but just like that area in general.
Okay. Kind of that North Texas.
Yeah, like Panhandle of Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, like that area.
Okay. So that's what you would call home, is kind of that section, the Bible Belt, so to say.
The plains.
Yep. So let's talk a little bit about your family history. So obviously, I know you and your brother both were in the Army or still actively in the Army. Let's kind of talk a little bit about, it's pretty interesting, some of the family lineage that you have in the military. So kind of just walk us from you and your brother and then back down the family tree, so to say. So you guys were in the Army, and then what was the next kind of generation of military?
I had a couple uncles that were in the Marine Corps. One of them got medically discharged. The other one was a career Marine. Okay. I think he did about 23 years. And then he retired. And then I have some cousins. I have 3 cousins. I think they were in the military. So 1 Army, 1 Marines, 1 Air Force. And then we had some like distant relatives. Like my grandpa's cousin was in the Marines in Vietnam. And then we had my great grandpa landed on Normandy. And one of his brothers landed there with him as well. And the other one was in the Pacific. And they all 3 got drafted. So, I mean, they had that. And then there's some other military like history farther back, but I don't know a whole lot about it. Just a little here and there type thing.
Okay. So you definitely grew up with military being one of the options out of Spearman, so to say.
Oh, yeah. Well, it was like my father was a combat engineer in the 82nd.
Okay.
I forgot about that. And my stepdad was a machinist in the Navy and a firefighter. He also rodeoed for the Navy.
Yeah. I didn't know that there was a rodeo in the Navy.
Yeah.
I guess the whole Navy's a rodeo, huh?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, we grew up around it. I mean, for as long as I can remember, my brother and I were playing Army with my father's old BDU tops and stuff. And just running around playing Army, shooting each other.
Yep.
Digging foxholes.
Yeah.
For fun.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny thinking about it now. Like, do all that for fun, but.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So you and Cameron were 18 months apart. Is that correct?
We were 18 months apart. He was older.
What was that like growing up? So you guys obviously both had military interest. I know that you guys both had different career paths prior to going into the military, but when you guys were in like middle school, getting into high school, did you guys both talk about joining the military?
We didn't really talk about it. We just, we always, even when we were growing up, we played airsoft, paintball, stuff like that. So it was always kind of like a theme
Yeah.
throughout it. Like I wasn't in like athletics as much as Cameron was. Cameron was always like high adrenaline, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then he got out of high school, went to college, but it just I didn't really fit for him.
Mm-hmm.
And he tried to go in the Marine Corps, and the Marine Corps denied him because they said somebody messed up his medical history and said he had hip surgery, but he had
Okay.
never had hip surgery. So he was fighting that for a long time, and he got tired of it. And so then, I'm trying to remember, he just went to work, just working odds and ends, and then he tried to go back in the Marine Corps, and to get it fixed up in Kansas, he went to a different recruitment station thinking that they could help him, and it was the same song and dance. So I moved up there, about to start college. Then we had some family issues. Cameron moved back to Spearman, was working, and then I was in college. And then he went to the police academy and became a police officer
Now, what town was that out of?
in Amarillo.
Okay.
Well, that's where he went to the police academy, but he was a cop in Dalhart, Texas.
Okay.
And then for like the police department. And
Mhm.
then he ended up going to, I think it's the Potter County Sheriff's Department in Amarillo.
Mm-hmm.
And then he still wanted to be in the military. So he decided to go to the Army and see if they could help him. And they helped him. So he got in.
How old was he roughly at that time? Like 24?
Yeah, I
something
think he was
that?
like 23, something like that.
Okay. So initially went the military route, wasn't working out with the Marines, which is funny because that was kind of like the same situation with me. That was my first go-to was the Marine Corps. And it was same as like some weird administrative logistical things that they were getting hung up on. And probably just also on my end, I wasn't actually ready to make that commitment at that time, at least for me. So he ends up going law enforcement for a couple of years. I know me and him had talked about that a little bit, so I know some of the stories that kind of helped turn him back towards the military. That was giving him kind of the bigger vision of what he was ultimately wanting to be a part of.
Yeah, he wanted to make a bigger difference than what
Yeah.
he was at the police department.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Okay, so he finds himself working with the Army. And then, do you remember, did he get an Option 40 contract right off the bat?
Yeah.
Okay, was he pretty familiar with Ranger Regiment and what that lifestyle looked like?
No.
Okay. So shock and awe for him.
I think he just wanted to do something cool.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he ended up doing.
Okay. So he ends up joining roughly around 23, finds himself going through obviously the whole infantry pipeline, which we both know that. And then he ended up at 2nd Ranger Battalion, which is where I ended up working with him. And I know when he first got there, he was in a different company and then got reassigned to the company that I was in. And he was actually one of the first team leaders in the squad that I showed up to. So I was in weapons squad and he was one of the weapons team leaders at the time. That's kind of like where I initially got to know him. It's kind of interesting. We have like very different dynamic. So kind of the culture of where I grew up. So you're off in, the Bible Belt, North rural Texas, growing up in that very small, tight-knit community. Like you're saying, the parents are going to find out if you did something before you can even get back and admit it. On the other hand, I grew up in basically right outside of downtown Denver. So very much the city life, not the tight-knit community. I mean, there's communities that you find yourself in. Patriotic is not what I would say I was, born and raised around. It was just people living life, doing their own thing. Not any family history in the military on my end. Same thing. It was me and my brother Tom would play versions of Army. You know what I mean? I can remember a couple details of me and him getting some walkie-talkies, and like we grew up on a dead-end street next to a creek, and so we were down in the creek, doing some recon, moving around in middle school and stuff like that. He was a few years older than me, so yeah, interesting experience kind of growing up with that, just seeing like that's where me and him connected. That's obviously how you and Cameron connected, is that very shared interest. So it was you and Cameron, and then you had a couple half siblings.
Yeah, I have 2 half brothers and a half sister.
Okay. So I grew up in a family. I have 7 siblings, and me and my brother Tom were definitely the ones that were interested in like the active side of life, and kind of that like warrior spirit. So he also was in the process of almost joining the Marines when he was younger. He ended up getting married at like 18 years old, so pretty young. Ended up not joining the military because of that. And then he also found himself later on, a few years down the line after that, in law enforcement, which is what he kind of ended out his career out at Aurora Police Department in Denver. So definitely different culture growing up in. Let's talk back. So in Denver, I mean, your options out of your environment are kind of limitless. It's whatever, your community and your family and your personal interests. It could be college, it could be just working. Kind of in my family dynamic, it was definitely just like find a career path of some sort, and that's what's going to lead you to your own life. So coming out of Spearman, obviously being in a smaller town, it's like you had a few options, right? Sounds like it was you could get out of town by being kind of who you and Cameron were, either through the military, through sports options, or like going into the
college.
Yeah, college or farming or something like that.
Yeah, it's like a lot of farming, a lot of like oil field, just blue collar type stuff. And then like if you were smart enough or you got scholarships, you could go to college or for sports and stuff like that. But the military was pretty heavy. Like the recruiters, they like the small towns where they can come and snatch up all the kids.
They're meeting their quota out of there every year.
Yeah.
So let's kind of talk back to your timeline. So you graduate high school. You also go off to college. What'd you go and study?
So I went to college for diesel engine mechanics.
Okay.
So I got my associates in diesel engine technology and my certificate in diesel mechanics.
Okay.
But like that wasn't my first option. My first option was machinist to go along with like my gunsmithing, but they canceled that program. And me being, the genius 18-year-old, I was like, oh, what's the next thing on the list? And just picked, and I ended up going into it and never touched an engine in my life. And, God's grace is a lot better than our decision making. Mm-hmm. He put me right where I needed to be, and it worked out perfect.
Okay.
And then after that, I just went home, went to work. I worked for Case IH as a heavy tractor mechanic, but worked on everything, lawnmowers, just combines, everything, whatever they needed me to do.
Okay. So, and then you did that for 5 years, roughly?
It was about 6.5, 7 years.
Okay, perfect. So I guess you joined the Army at 26?
Yeah, it would have been 26.
Okay. So let's talk about kind of the process of joining the military for you. So you were working as a heavy machinery mechanic at the time?
Mechanic.
All right. And then what did the process look like joining the military? So you joined a little bit later on.
Yeah, so like I was later in life compared to most people, but I knew I wanted to. I had been talking to my brother for a while. It's always been something I wanted to do. And even after going to college and all that, that feeling, that call never went away. Mm-hmm. So I would go back and forth talking with my brother about it. And then, like he died. And then I waited till after that all kind of calmed down to go in. But I knew I wanted to join. So I started studying because I knew it'd been a while since I'd been to school. So I figured I better freshen that up, and then studied for it was like 2 or 3 months, and then called the recruiter, which that was an interesting experience because it was during the height of COVID. So I couldn't go into the office. So they came to me, but I had to wait until they got approval to start traveling again. So they came over to my trailer, and then I took the ASVAB on their computer, and then they went back to Amarillo and whatever and looked at all my stuff and looked at my options, and like that's pretty much it. Like I'd had a high enough score that I could do whatever I wanted. So at that point, it was like see what's available and then do all the medical and all the paperwork and all that, which is where all the fun began.
Yeah. So infantry was still kind of the bigger idea over any of the other smarter options, so to say?
Not really.
No?
I looked at, so like 18 X-ray was the contract I was looking at getting. And then I looked at EOD, and then there was some other random stuff, but like I wanted to be combat arms because I felt like that gave me the best option to go to different schools later on, which I mean, I guess it is because you can get priority over some other MOSs. And I like to shoot stuff, so I figured might as well go into something. But yeah.
Ran into some medical hurdles during
I had a history of psoriasis, which blocked me from having any airborne contracts.
Okay.
So I had to go through a bunch of stuff with that, which was another hurdle in itself because of COVID, because none of the MEPS doctors were seeing patients. So the wait was like months. Like it was actually, they didn't know when I would be able to get in. because of it. So I had to go through a civilian doctor, had to go on my own and get checked to get cleared for the psoriasis.
Okay.
Which I got cleared on it and then got the contract and shipped out.
Okay. So then went to basic training. What was kind of the biggest thing? So what was you kind of left your own job, you had your own kind of stable living condition. What was the biggest thing that kind of changed in your personal life when you joined the military as a 26-year-old?
Not having control of my day to day.
Yeah.
Not being independent, like adult.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, I had in my own house, my own car, my own job. I had my own, side hobbies, like side career type thing.
Mm-hmm.
I had it my whole life, and I put it all in a storage unit and got on an airplane to Georgia. And then there I was in a bay with like 100 people,
Yeah. So talk us kind of through going through just MEPS and then 30th AG and then basic training during COVID, and then kind of what has been your career path ever since.
So like when I went to MEPS, I went to MEPS like 3 times.
Okay. Was it all the medical waivers that were getting in the way?
I had to have a waiver for the psoriasis, and I had to have a waiver for my vision. And then I think those were only 2. But COVID really complicated that process because so you would show up, they'd put you in a hotel.
Mm-hmm.
Before you could go in the hotel, you had to have your temperature taken.
Mm-hmm.
And if you had a high temperature, you had to reschedule. So like if you got your temperature taken, you go in, you went to your room, you weren't allowed to leave your room. You get up in the morning and go downstairs, and then they would take your temperature again.
Mm-hmm.
If you were good, then they put you on the van to take you to MEPS. Once you got the MEPS, they took your temperature again. And if you were good, you could go in. If you weren't, you got rejected. So then you went in, and then you would, whatever they had to do that day, whether it was like vision or hearing or whatever, you just the whole process. You just go in there and sit and wait till your name's called. And we had to wear a mask the whole time, which sucked.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I don't know how to like compare it to other people's experience in MEPS because that was my experience in MEPS.
Mm-hmm.
So
it finally worked out, and then you found yourself at 30th AG.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and COVID was real.
Mm-hmm.
And we got there, and you show up, and they have the first 72 hours where you basically don't sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And we finally got to sleep after it was like the second night or whatever, and slept for 3 hours next to a dude who tested positive for COVID. So I got thrown in Camp Kelly, the quarantine zone, for 2 weeks for close contact. And then got out of that, went back to 30th AG, like the reception battalion. But no one was moving because there was no available training battalions because everybody had been locked down for COVID. So everything was backed up.
Mm-hmm.
So we waited 2 weeks, but there still was nowhere for us to go. And there was a whole nother group, like 1,000 people or whatever coming in. So they had to move us somewhere. So they put us in some old abandoned barracks for like a holdover unit. And we stayed there for 2 weeks until a battalion opened up for us to go train.
Okay. So you made it through basic training.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that was its own crazy experience going through COVID. I know you said it took 20.
Yeah, it was supposed to be, I think they changed it from 14 weeks to 22 weeks.
Okay.
But then they shortened it supposedly to 20 to help move things along because of the backup from COVID. But I was there for 28 weeks.
That's rough. That's a hard time to be at Sand Hill.
It was a great time.
Okay, so you graduate basic training. How'd that kind of feel? Any sort of accomplishment? Any highlight with that?
I mean, not really for turning green. Basic training is just kind of like, I don't know.
What about graduating OSIT? Kind of just being done with that entire pipeline.
So once you're finally done with it, it's nice because you get to like move on, so you're like, oh, okay, like move on to the next thing, actually get to do something, figure out like what's going on. I don't know if like just for me personally compared to like the stories my brother told or just like in the past, like with family, like I feel like we always have this idea of like what we think it's going to be like, and it did not live up to the hype that I had put in my head. And so some of it I felt it was a little underwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't feel like don't feel like a lot of it was earned, just especially with COVID, because there was a lot of things that like they didn't count because they couldn't because COVID. So a lot of people that shouldn't have graduated got pushed through just because like there's they just got pushed through because COVID.
Yeah.
So like, but like when I got my cross rifles, that was a pretty big moment for me. It was kind of, we weren't allowed to have like actual graduations because of COVID. So like there was no family. But I don't know what my mom did. She used her status as a gold star mom to get there. And so my parents were there and my dad was able to put my blue cord on, which meant a lot to me because I put my brothers on him. So it was kind of like that was a good moment.
Yeah.
But like, I just remember we were on, what is it? Oh crap. Like where they do the bonfire. I'm trying to remember.
Oh, Honor Hill.
Honor Hill. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just went blank. We were doing that and one of the drill sergeants came up to me and he like shook my hand and he looked me in the eye and he asked me if I thought my brother would be proud of me. So that was kind of when it hit me. Like I was like, yeah, I think he would. Just maybe not so much just because like the standards had changed. Like I feel like y'all's standard when y'all went through was probably harder than what I dealt with. But just like making the choice to actually like walk away from my life and join, completely do something different. Like just taking the step to actually act on the calling I had.
Yeah.
I think he would be proud of that.
Yeah. I think everyone's going to have, first of all, the argument could be made that it was harder the prior time by every single generation or cycle that's ever gone through that place. But I think people's service level is always going to look different. You're going to have on one side of the extreme, people like myself and you that joined later in life and walked away from careers and walked away from our own pre-built opportunities and then gave that up to have an active service. And then you have people on the other end that join fresh out of high school, 17, 18 years old. They're giving up the exact same thing, just proactively instead of post. You know what I mean? So they're giving up the opportunity to go build that same path that we found ourselves on. So it looks different. I know being an adult has its own challenges because, again, you've learned how to think for yourself. You've learned how to make decisions, and then they're putting you back to the same square one as everyone else that has not learned how to do that yet.
Yeah.
And they're going to teach you how to do it under their own, advising, so to say. But Honor Hill was actually a pretty memorable time for me as well. Basic training in OSA as a whole was kind of underwhelming. I mean, it had its challenges for sure. It's a big culture shock. It's a big shock in general just to be on such lockdown and supervision as an adult. But getting the cross rifles is kind of a pretty cool experience. Honor Hill is a fun, you have a bonfire, you have the grog, you have the history of the infantry there that they kind of walk you through, and you get to stand on the same ground that everyone who's ever graduated as an infantryman has at some point. So it's cool because it can tie you to your brother, and it can tie you to your uncles, it can tie you to your grandparents, it can tie you to your dad, anyone that has gone through Sand Hill at Fort Benning, which is a pretty cool opportunity because there's nobodies that have stood there and there's Medal of Honor recipients that have stood there. So pretty awesome experience generally. So what's been your career path? So you ended up going into the infantry. You're with a major infantry unit up in Washington. What have you been doing job-wise?
So when I first showed up there, they get your ERB, your records brief, and my platoon sergeant got mine. They called me in the office and he's like, "You have a degree?" And I was like, "Yeah, I have my associates." And he asked me what it was in. I told him diesel mechanics. And that's where I started my own demise because they saw that and they're like, "Oh, you're our new driver." So I became the weapons squad driver for 3rd Platoon. And I did that for a year. And they told me that, once I finished that time, like that training cycle, then I'd get moved to the line. Well, I did my job too well. And then my CO picked me to be the new CO's driver. So I got moved to our headquarters platoon and became our CO's driver. And like, I didn't really know. I mean, it is what it is. Like at that point, I'd already been doing it for a year, but I was getting tired of being a driver because you spend all your time in the motor pool. And if you're in the military and you know what a motor pool is, then you know it's a great time. And so I did that, and then up until this last year, and then I got moved to VC, as vehicle commander. So I'm a gunner on the Striker.
Okay. So held a couple different hats. You're obviously still in. You got a couple more years left that you'll be serving. Probably do a couple other random jobs, potentially some other schools. So this is all happening in 2020 of you joining, going into like 2021 of getting to your unit. So kind of want to transition and take us to kind of the main focus of this talk. So let's walk ourselves back to 2019. So we're about to kind of get into, losing our brothers. So for me, it was a little bit longer of a timeline that this kind of transpired. So my brother, Tom, actually found out that he had cancer in 2015. I ended up joining the Army just a few months later in the beginning of 2016. So he found out he had cancer in 2015. It's kind of a weird, he had colon cancer, which for being a younger guy was pretty abnormal. It was fairly aggressive, some larger tumors. And basically the next 3.5 years was kind of, hey, we've gotten rid of it. Okay, it sprouted back up. We've gotten rid of it. So a bunch of surgeries, chemo, etc. They thought they had gotten on the other end of it several times. So it was in November of 2019. I was actually in Germany in between the United States and then the Middle East, going out on my last deployment out with Ranger Regiment. And he shot me a text and said, hey, I need to talk to you before you get on the plane. So I called him from Germany, and that's actually when he told me, he said, hey, they had done another, biannual screening, and they had found out that the cancer had come back and very aggressively and made its way into his lymph system. And so it was a terminal diagnosis. So I was going on a, 3 to 4 month deployment, and they'd given him like between 6 and 9 months. So I was slotted to get out of the Army later on in 2020, kind of timed right around the same time that they were expecting him to pass away. So I spent that deployment communicating with him as much as possible. We actually took a really cool trip to California as soon as I got back, like on my post-deployment leave. And we had planned that kind of all across the deployment. We had made a itinerary and a few things that we wanted to go see in California. And then I got back, finished my time out in the Army, was able to take my terminal leave out process a couple months early, and then spend the last 3 months that I could with him. And then he ended up passing away in September of 2020. And I was able to get back home in around July of 2020. So I was able to spend a few months with him. And we'll kind of dive into that a little bit more in detail going forward here. But let's take it back to January of 2019. So talk me through kind of the scenario. Obviously, your brother's deployed at the time. It was on my first deployment trip that we went on together. So talk me through what it was like getting that phone call, or how did that kind of play out for you and your family?
Yes, I mean, like we would communicate, but it was like really limited. You know how it is over there, and like so he would send like text messages every once in a while. But I would like text him, and if he answered me, he answered me. If he didn't, he didn't. So it never really like, is what it is. Like if he answers you or not. But I think I talked to him on the 11th. Was it 11th or 12th? And I sent him a text. It was January 12th. I sent him a text message, told him good night. And that was the last time I ever talked to him. I woke up. It was, it had been like right after midnight. My phone was ringing, which never happens. And it was my dad. So I knew something was wrong. I didn't know like it was my brother. Like I knew something was going on. I answered it, and he was, frantic, and he told me that Cameron had been shot. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he was like, yeah, he got shot earlier today and blah, blah, just telling me what he knew. And then then Stevie, my brother's wife, called me. And I told my dad, I was like, hey, Stevie's calling me. He's like, all right, like, talk to her. So he hung up, and I talked to Stevie, and she was, rightfully freaking out. Like, she was upset. And that was when I found out that he had been hit in the head and that she was going to Germany. And then, like, she had to go because all that was going on for her. She just wanted to let me know, and I hung up the phone and like I don't know how to like express that feeling. Like I hit my knees and I prayed a long time.
Mm.
And like I didn't know what to do. Like there's nothing you can do. It's like a sense of helplessness, not hopelessness, but
Mm-hmm.
like you want to do something, but there's nothing you can do. And so all you can do is wait. And that would have been on a Saturday. And I worked on Saturdays at my old job. So I got up the next morning, I went to work, told them what was going on, and that like probably gonna have to go somewhere. And at that time we were waiting because he had been taken to Bagram and was being treated there. And at that time, by the end of Saturday, they told us he was still critical, obviously. And then Saturday went and like that was I don't even remember that day. It was just like a blur. But woke up Sunday, went to church. Like everybody, was small town again. Like everybody already knew about it. Everybody was asking me about it, whatever. And I got a phone call from Stevie saying that he was stabilized and like that everything, it looked like he was going to be okay. And that they were moving him from Afghanistan to Germany to Landstuhl to the military hospital. And I was like, that was a lot of weight lifted because like, when you hear that like they're doing good. So that happened. Stevie was going to Germany. Like she was in the process of going over there. And then I think it was later that day. That's when we started talking to the military, when they started contacting us. And I want to say it was like on that Monday. I went to work and I had to leave work and we went to the post office to get our passport photos taken and do all that stuff. And we did that. And then I think it was like, I don't remember. My mind was like everywhere. I want to say it was like it was either that Tuesday or Wednesday. Like they got us plane tickets to Germany like fast. And so we got on a plane. Like I can't remember who took us to Amarillo. We went to Amarillo airport, flew to Dallas, and went from Dallas to Washington D.C. And that was an experience. I'd never been to D.C., but this blacked out SUV came, picked us up, and took us down to the passport office. And we walked in there, and we walked out like 2 hours later with passports. So it was a really fast paced, like they prioritized it. Like it was, and there was like a bunch of people. There's some I can't remember there some kind of program that deals with like fallen rangers. It's like a ranger organization. They were there to help us kind of like through the steps. They weren't like they were affiliated with the ranger regiment, but they weren't like active. They just were there to basically help us through the process. And then we got on a plane and flew to Frankfurt and then drove down to Landstuhl. And that was when everything kind of went sideways. So
and was this you and your parents?
Mm-hmm.
And was Cameron's wife already out there at this point?
Yeah, she was there before us. And she called us when we were at the passport office, and she said that it didn't look good. But last we had heard, they said that they were cautiously optimistic, which I now loathe that term because we'll get into that. But so we landed there, drove to the hospital, and then we went in. They put us in this little room. It was the weirdest room. It was a tiny little room about the size of this, but it was full of couches. There was like nowhere to walk. It was just couches, just randomly thrown in there. It was just weird. I don't know why I remember that. I just remember that. And they set us all down, and the surgeon came in and basically told us that he was brain dead and there was no recovery. Like basically they told us that we had like a timeline on when like we didn't need to. They told us we could take as long as we wanted, but eventually we had to choose a time to let him die. So that was like all the hope that we got from before when they told us that, he was stabilized and looked like he was going to make it, like that all like disappeared instantly. So that was a huge shock. And so we spent the next like 2 days just like trying to like wrap our minds around it. And then like I just remember like Stevie was she like 5 months pregnant, 6 months pregnant. So like I knew she was pregnant. So he found out after he went to Afghanistan she was pregnant. He sent me a picture of the ultrasound. But when we were there, like they did an ultrasound with her like laying in the bed next to Cameron. And it was surreal. Like I don't know, like it was just a lot like in one event. But I mean, and then they chose, I think it was 11 a.m. on the 19th was when they chose to, or not 19th, 17th. I always, yeah, 17th.
Mm-hmm.
It was 11 a.m. on the 17th is when they chose to unplug him.
Okay.
For lack of a better term.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, it wasn't like getting the news was one thing, but like there was no, they asked us if we wanted to like keep him on the machine. There's no, like to me, there was no question.
Right.
Like, so it was hard.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, and we went out to this village, I think Kaiserslautern, just to get away because we needed to like get away. And I remember because like forever, Cameron and I had talked about going to Germany together. And I was standing there on the top of this castle in Germany. I was like, well, I guess we made it to Germany together.
Yeah.
But, I look at that. It's kind of funny that thought went through my mind at that time. But,
Yeah.
The brain's weird.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it was very traumatic.
Yep.
To say the least.
Nah, I could imagine. So you guys make your way back home.
Yeah.
There's some pretty soon plans for the funeral party, which I was a part of down there in Spearman. So what did those next couple of months? I'm sure it's very much a blur. And I know we talked about it a little bit earlier, but what were kind of some of the things that stick out over the next few months as far as things that you ended up doing with your family, starting with the funeral and then going kind of forward from there?
Yeah. So like we came home from Germany and I don't remember how many days it was, but I just went back to work. Like I didn't know what else to do. Like my work, they didn't care if I came or not. Like I was just kind of there just to like keep my mind occupied. And we were still waiting at that time for, his body to be transferred. And once it like finally showed up, we went to Amarillo and that was an amazing experience in itself. Like it was very sad. Like it was a very hard moment. But like the outpouring of support and patriotism that I saw was insane.
Yeah.
So Amarillo is about 90 miles from my hometown. And when we left the airport, the whole road down, I don't even know how long that road is, but it was just solid people.
Mm-hmm.
Just flags and people supporting just to be there. And we left Amarillo and the entire way home, everyone that was on the road stopped and they were like saluting or just standing there, praying or whatever. Like no one, like it seemed like the world stopped. And every town we went through from one edge to the other was lined with people.
Mm-hmm.
So like the patriotism back home it's real. It's different. And like, most of those towns, like my brother played football in them. But like it'd been a few years since he played. So like there may have been some people there that knew him or like played against him or, whatever. But they didn't know him. But it didn't matter whether they knew him. It's it's just the principle of what he stood for.
Mm-hmm.
And like what people believe and stand by,
Yeah, I think that's one of the really interesting things that happens in like a post-grief environment is you're going to see the best and the worst of people.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And we got home, went through the whole funeral home thing, and all that. And then we had the funeral, which it was really crazy because like you're talking about the best and worst of people. It is like, we were in Germany and I remember we just found out, that he just died. And I don't know how, but newspapers and reporters have a very, they're good at their job.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow they got my phone number. And I remember this lady from Stars and Stripes called me. And I'm sitting in the Fisher house which is like the house they give the families, or whatever, whenever something happens. I'm sitting there, like I was very, I don't know how to like describe like where I was. I didn't care like what I said. The lady called me and she explained to me who she was and that she was from the Stars and Stripes. And I was like, "Why are you calling me?" She's like, "Well, we want to know your brother's story." And I was like, "You want to know my brother's story?" I was like, "Lady, my brother's not even cold yet, and you're calling me?" And she didn't say anything. And now looking back on that, I probably should have handled that a little different. But at that moment, like it didn't matter to me.
Yeah.
And so like people instantly started like trying to, like, people want to help. People did help us. People reached out to like support us and do things. But we also had people that reached out for their own public notoriety. Like we had some people that were not my brother's friend or were not close to us or a part of our life. Maybe they went to high school with us or something. But like we had some people that tried to play my brother's like best friend in the world, and tried to like be something they weren't. And that was another obstacle in itself, dealing with that. Like, like most of us are going to die like a normal, quiet death and just kind of have a funeral and go away. My brother's was not quiet, which is funny because like he hated attention and he got more attention than, most people. And so we found that to be kind of ironic and funny in itself. Like we joked about that, Stevie and I, but like, you get angry whenever people try to use that situation for their own benefit.
Yeah, that's another weird side of grief where it's like there is some sort of grief, like people will put themselves closer to it because it's very raw and it's a way to be recognized for something. It's a way to feel a part of something that's very intimate.
Yeah, try to put themselves in the center of it.
Which I think one of the things we had talked about earlier is like not trying to be overly judgmental of how people handle grief. I think it's pretty cut and dry to say there's people that will get involved in a scenario that we're not close to the individual, and it can be very disrespectful seeming towards the family and those that are close when people come out of the woodwork, so to say. And that kind of reminds me of something that you were saying earlier, which is like being around a small town in Spearman and then people coming up to you of like, "Oh, you're Cameron's brother."
Yeah.
So what was like that kind of scenario? How was that looking in the aftermath?
So like, we grew up, we were really close, 18 months, but he was the grade ahead of me. But like, we didn't look the same. I was obese. My brother was skinny, so we didn't look alike. So even people that we grew up with sometimes didn't know that we were actually brothers. And like, it's crazy. How like got the same last name. Like we live in the same house. Like, how'd you not put that together?
Yeah.
But like, so like once Cameron was in the army and, I had come home and I had my career and like I had my church and all that, like I had my own little community inside the community. I had my people that knew me, and then there was the people that knew Cameron, and then there was the people, that we had like a mutual relationship with. Like, we were connected through other people, like some of our friends, like Sawyer, like, we were friends, but Sawyer, like a lot of people, there's people I didn't even know. Like I'd seen them around, but you see people even in a small community, like you don't personally know them, you just know who they are. And like I'd have people be like, "Oh, you're Cameron's brother." Like, "Oh, you're Cameron's brother." And then they'd be like, "Well, how does like asking me about like how I felt or like," and I'm like, "Who are you?" Like, like why are you asking me that? Like, and then like you were saying, like it's when you're in that moment, it's easy to like be judgmental or just like react raw in those moments. Because like I had one lady, like we went to Germany and to be with Cameron. She came up to me and she's like, "I heard you went to Germany." And I was like, "Yeah." She's like, "Well, how was it?" And I was like, "What do you mean, how was it?" Like I wasn't on vacation. And she's like, "Well, like she was just trying to be nice and talk to me, but like, I wasn't in a place where like I took that very well." I was like, I wasn't on vacation, like, why are you saying this to me? But like, like you're saying, like not judging people based on how they deal with grief. Like even like me in that moment, like going through that, like I was judgmental of other people that were grieving and other people were judgmental of me. So like I went straight back to work. I just tried to, run away, like to hide in normalcy, trying to like seek, just go back to how it was before, to where I was comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And, other people were grieving a lot harder at that time. And some of them were getting mad at me because they didn't feel like I was like processing it the way they wanted me to.
Yeah.
They told me I needed to take time off of work and like all this. And I was like, no, like I need to work because that's the only thing that's keeping me moving.
Mm-hmm.
And like, working in the church and stuff like that, which was hard because I had my own spiritual battles after that. But just it's easy. Like it's weird how like even in that situation you can judge other people whenever you're doing it, you're going through the same thing.
Yeah. Grief's a really weird experience.
Mm-hmm.
And it shows, I wouldn't say it shows who you really are. I would say it shows a part of you that you're not very used to.
Oh, yeah.
And if you don't have experience with it, which most people don't, then you're going to be kind of navigating those waters for the first time in the midst of that, which is where a lot of the judgment can come from because people are making mistakes. Some people will stand out in a positive way for a little bit. That's how it was when my brother died. It was like I was handling things really well at the beginning, and then I fell off of things.
Oh yeah, it's the same way with me.
Mm-hmm.
Like I had people saying like, I don't understand how you're like saying like the way you are or whatever. Like, how are you taking it this well? And I was like, I don't know. Like I was just there at that moment, and like I remember the day that it finally like hit me. It was just another day. Like I went to work and I had my RV, and right next to my RV I had a forge where I did my blacksmithing. And I went to work. It was just at that time, it was a normal day, which I was still dealing with it, but, not like anything severe. And I came home and I walked up the steps to my trailer and opened the door, and I opened it. I had all my stuff in there, and I had like an axe sitting there, like a wood splitting axe. And I just looked at it, and I walked in and grabbed it and walked outside. I had this stump that I would use to like test hatchets and stuff that I would build, and I didn't use the blade part because it would stick. I used the hammer side on the back and just beat that log to nothing. Like there was so much anger, and it was just like a switch flipped.
Yeah.
And like I didn't know there was like I don't know. I just beat that log.
Yeah.
And then I sat down on my steps and cried. Like I don't even. That was like when it really hit me.
Mm-hmm.
So and like there's still some days where it doesn't seem real.
Yeah.
Like, cause like he was so far away from me most days, like our normal life, he was here and I was in Texas, he's in Afghanistan. And I've talked to some of the guys like Brian and them. And sometimes it feels like he's just over there and he just hasn't come home yet,
Yeah.
And it's been, 4 years and there's still times where it just doesn't seem real.
Yeah.
So that's another weird part of grief.
Yeah, I've been in that. It's definitely an ebb and a flow. There's like times of stability and strength, and then other times where, whether it's like something that's happening anniversary based, it's coming up on their birthday, it's coming up on the, the anniversary of them passing. It's some situation that you encounter in life that like makes you think of them, and then it like brings it all back. Sometimes it's in a crushing way. Sometimes it's in a very positive, like reflection and, happy memory type of way.
Yeah, like I try to like on the anniversaries, you try to honor them and remember them, and usually it's not like those days are not the days where it's the hardest for me. This past Memorial Day was pretty hard for me. I don't know why. It just this year it was, but like usually it's just random days. Like you're talking about memories, and like I was telling you earlier, like I'll remember something we did as a kid, and I'll want to like text him and be like, "Hey, you remember that time we did this, But like. Cameron was my only full blood brother. So like, and he was 18 months older than me. So basically the first, like, I don't know, 23 years of my life, he was like there every day, like even when we weren't like actually there, like we talked every day.
Yeah.
So like he was a very integral part of like my life and who I am. So like, he's my best friend.
Yeah.
So like, now that I'm past that and like I have these memories, like there's no one to share those memories with. So sometimes it just feels like, did this actually happen? Or am I just dreaming this?
I think that's one of the hard things about losing somebody, especially somebody that's so pivotal in your life is it's just hard to renormalize life because it will renormalize, but then there's going to be a void there.
Yeah,
and you can fill the void with
a new normal.
Yeah, new normal for sure. So let's talk a little bit about, you were talking earlier, kind of explaining how in those next couple of months afterwards, obviously there was a lot going on. It started out as really supportive, very patriotic, I'm sure.
Yeah, it continued to be patriotic. Like our school was like in the process. So they put a little bench out front and it's like a memorial bench and has his name on it, which is nice. And then there's 3 trees. There's one tree for my brother, one for Stevie, and one for Brinley. And I find it funny that they planted trees in the Texas Panhandle where there's no trees. Yeah. But like keeping them alive is going to be fun. But they're doing a good job and it's really nice, like the sentiment behind it. But my brother, when he was in high school, he was an athlete. And he spent, I remember his free time was in the gym, which is funny because if you knew him back then, he was really small. You couldn't tell that he always worked out and it always drove him crazy. I remember he tried to gain weight for football one year. He was trying to pack on some pounds. And I remember he ate everything in sight and he would go buy like a large pizza every day and eat it because he was trying to put on weight and he lost weight and how mad he was. And like, so like he was always in the gym. So they built a new weight room, locker room, and they named it after him. And then like, you know, they updated our memorial at our courthouse and they have, you know, the Afghanistan and just Cameron. But like, so like they did, so each one of those was like its own memorial event. So like, it was just like one memorial after another, after another, after another. And like they did one in Amarillo. They did one in Lubbock. I didn't go to the one in Amarillo. And then I went to the one in Lubbock. That was the last one I went to. And then they had one at the National Infantry Museum. And then, well, I went to the one at Ranger Bat up here in Washington. But that was one of the first ones I think they did. I can't remember. But it was a lot. It was like just it seemed like every week there was something new. And like, it was really hard for me to continue to go to those things because I'm trying to like process it and trying to like return to that, not return to normal, but build my new normal. And I remember they invited us to go to the White House to this memorial dinner. And I said no. I was like, I don't want to go. And everybody just looked at me like I was crazy because they're like, you're going to meet the president. I was like, cool. Yeah. Like, who is he? Like, I don't care. Like, yeah, he's the president of the United States, but like, he means less to me than my brother. Like, yeah. So like, to me, it was like, I don't care. Like that, I'm not in a place where I want to go do that. My family went and like, yeah, I probably should have went, but whatever, man. Yeah. Like, just another person to me. Like, I don't care like what your position is or like how rich you are. Like, that's just not who I am. Like, that doesn't mean anything to me.
Yeah, I know it was kind of interesting. After my brother passed away, I was personally really trying to like build some sort of further legacy. There was obviously different people in his life and organizations that were really proud of what he had done with them individually or with that group. But I know on a personal level, I was trying to prolong that legacy. There wasn't as many of those continuous things. And that didn't end up, going to a lot of places either. But I can see very much how that would just be draining to continue to go and just like, it's almost like you're getting stuck in the grief stage.
Yeah, they won't let you leave it.
Yeah, because it's like you have to go back and you're still the grieving brother.
Yeah, you got to play the role.
Yeah. So I can see how that would lead to burnout for sure.
Which is like, I want to say playing a role. Like, it sounds like acting. Like, I mean, it is amazing what they did and honoring him. Like, that's great. Like, as long as they honor him and as long as like his name is on those monuments, like, that's his legacy. Like, that's his memory. Cameron used to say, like, as long as your name is spoken, like, you continue to live. Like, you only you die twice. Like, you die your physical death and then the last time your name is spoken. Yeah. So, like, like, that's what he paid the price for it. So, like, he should be honored. And I appreciated it, and like the sentiment and all that. But, the stuff they did at home meant more because the people that were there doing it knew him.
Mm-hmm.
So it was sincere to me.
Yeah.
Like the stuff in Washington, D.C., like, you know, they didn't know him.
Yeah.
Like some of the people that did know him were the ones we were going there. But like, I appreciate, everything they do. But just knowing my brother and like he didn't like attention, I was just tired of it. Like I just wanted to like move on, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
Like,
I think part of like continuing somebody's legacy, we think a lot, especially from the outside, like people that are not intimately close to that individual. They think it's all about reliving the story of how they passed and just keeping that piece alive. Like, oh, Cameron's a hero. Here's what he was doing in his life. But I think a big piece of it is continuing his legacy through the people that he impacted, which is your personal story, my personal story, his wife's personal story, his daughter's personal story. Like it's going to look a little bit different because it's now going to be like, okay, well, what's still alive of Cameron? It's you, it's your parents.
Yeah, it's our lives.
His family. It's our lives now. And so it's like when we tell his story through our perspective, which we're doing now, I think this is one of the best ways to keep it alive versus just an annual memorial that pays homage to the traumatic incident, not the still living piece.
But yeah, I mean, it's intertwined with us. It's part of who we are. And like even my story, so like my time in like Fort Benning was different. Cameron wasn't there because he had already died. But like when I graduated, we went to the National Infantry Museum. They have the Global War on Terror monument, and we were there. And I walked outside, and I walked over, and his name was it was right there on the wall at the bottom. And I didn't go to that memorial when they dedicated it, but I ended up standing there in front of it the day I graduated. And that meant more to me. That hit me harder than anything. And like I broke down in front of that monument. And there was one of the ladies there that like she runs like the NIM. She's like one of the coordinators or whatever. And she found out, that I was Cameron's brother. And like she had me go down there so that I could get like a rubbing of it or whatever. And like all the people that I went through OSIT with like crowded around me. So it went from being a private moment to a very public display of like my brother's sacrifice and then my choice to be standing there. So like even his sacrifice is played into my story.
Yeah.
And like a lot of people think I joined because of my brother. And like it's not because of like him dying that I joined. Like I can't say that I didn't join by his influence because he did influence me and he helped, push me towards that. But it was it's just interesting like how that works. And then like I heard something one time and this guy said like, if you're close to somebody and anybody in your life, you give them some portion of love. Well, like when you love somebody, you give them a part of you. A part of you goes to them and a part of them comes to you. So like when that person dies, a part of you dies with them. But a part of them lives on inside you.
Yeah.
And the best way we can honor them is to continue to live a fulfilling life or like, live a life worth living.
Yeah.
So because like they live through you, like in their memory, not like literally, but like, their memory lives on through you. So like, I just feel like I think it's true because I know a part of me like died with my brother.
Same.
And it's not something you can really like put into words.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. I think it's less about the externally organized things and it's more about the personal moments. I found situations during hikes after the fact, probably one of the very impactful things for me was done privately. Also, it was the night of us burying my brother. So we buried him on a Saturday morning and he was cremated. And I actually hiked from his house up to the gravesite the night prior. So like through the night, it was like a 9 or 10 hour long hike. And I started it pretty late at like 9 p.m. Got up to the grave site, the cemetery at around 7 a.m. And so that was that hike. And I took his ashes in the pack that I carried. And so it was like me and him just spent some quiet time together as we got up there, and when I went to bury the small casket that my dad, and my older brother and myself built together prior to him dying. It was like a very nostalgic, memorable time because I buried a couple other things with him, things that I carried up there with me from the military, like physical items that reminded me of stuff. And I just kind of let go of some of those things in that moment. But yeah, I think you'll find that recovery and that answer to grief in very individualized ways. It's less about the organized stuff. It's not the funeral that's going to make things come to rest. It's an individual time you have with yourself and your own emotions after the fact.
Yeah, it's no outside influences changing where you're at that moment. Like, it's 100% internal. It's you. And like, whatever you have in life, it plays into that. Like whether you're spiritual or not, like, that helps or whatever.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the aftermath. So what does it look like? Now, obviously it's going to be, one thing I have learned is, it's been 4 years since Cameron passed, coming up on 3 years since my brother passed. And it's definitely something that life will normalize again, but having a dead sibling is part of the normalization now. And so it's not like it ever goes away. It's not like it's something you don't think about, but it is something that becomes a part of your daily life, not the center of your daily life.
Yeah.
So what has normalization look like for you now? What type of hobbies are you into? How do you spend your time? What does it look like when, thoughts of Cameron come up?
Well, like now, like being in the military and living in the barracks, I'm limited to like what I can do, but like I just kayak and have my mountain bike and just hiking or whatever. Spent a lot of time in the gym recently. And like I find that like when those times happen, like I just, go work out, go kayaking or something to like just distract you, because you can sit and wallow in it and just get sadder. Like you can drink or whatever you want, but it's not gonna like, you're gonna go through it regardless.
Yeah.
Like it's going to be there. It's going to happen. No matter like how much you fight it, like those moments are gonna happen and you just have to like live through them. So you can choose to do, healthy, beneficial things, or you can do self-destructive things.
Yeah. I've been on both sides of that. I think I have a tendency to be self-destructive initially. Yeah. I have the ability to be very proactive and healthier with the response. It's been a huge learning curve in my life, just from losing guys in the military up to my brother, and just trying to navigate what does it look like to handle that better. And it's definitely knowing that it's a ebb and a flow that's going to come when you least expect it. You're right. It's not usually on the memorial times. It's actually just the in-betweens when you're at a vulnerable state because of insert whatever situation in life, or whatever it may be. And so having healthy outlets is extremely important, and having disciplines in your life that are a sounding board that are better than alcohol or drugs or anything. I know for myself, it's been, a lot of it has been found during hiking and walking. It's like where I get the clarity piece. That's kind of still my method right now, is when I feel like there's a lot to be thought about, or, I'm kind of in a down state. It's like, get out and just start walking, get out, do a workout, do something that exhausts me in another fashion. Cause I'm obviously emotionally or mentally exhausted when that moment comes on. So it's like, how do I pull myself away from that piece that's a little bit out of my control and throw in something that is in my control that's going to be as challenging, and then it gives a little perspective.
Yeah.
So
yeah, like prior to joining the military, my blacksmithing was my outlet. I mean, there ain't nothing like heating up a piece of metal and beating the crap out of it. Like that did it for me, And then using that anger or pain, more times for me it was pain than anger. And creating something with it. Like when you can take that energy and put it into something productive and have something to like look at, like, there's something, I don't know, for me, there's something about it. My grandpa taught me how to blacksmith, and he told me that every piece you make, a piece of you goes into it. So like a lot of the knives that I made during that time mean more to me, because to me, it's like that energy.
Yeah.
And like, I remember, it would have been that Saturday that when I found out Cameron got shot, I went to my grandparents, and that was where I hung out with my grandpa and we blacksmithed. And we were sitting in the house, and I just wanted to do something. So I went out in the forge and I forged a knife. I ended up finishing the knife and giving it to my grandpa.
Mm.
So like the day that I found out, like, Cameron got shot, like, so that knife to me means a lot, because to me it's like a memory,
Yeah.
because that energy went into it. And
Mm.
we choose where we put our energy.
Mm-hmm.
And whether you think it makes a difference or not, like, you can make a negative influence or a positive influence.
Yeah.
Like, I know it seems dumb saying like you're putting your energy into a piece of metal, but like, you can build up or you can destroy.
Yeah. I feel like grief gives you a surplus of emotion and
Oh yeah.
or energy, however you want to describe it. And you're 100% right. It's up to you of where do I direct that? Where do I put that? And do I be destructive with it or do I be productive with it? And that's definitely, again, been for me personally, the biggest learning curve is what does productive look like? And how can I be more cognizant of the destructive, and the bad habits that really does build?
Yeah, you need to be aware of like where you're at and when you're in those moments and what you need to do in those moments, and make sure you put yourself in the like right atmosphere or surround yourself with the right people. And like immediately after, and not just immediately, like the next year after my brother died, like I had a very good like support system through my church and through my friends. And looking back on it now, like, I don't I don't think I could have done it without him.
Mm.
Like that, like, I don't know. I think, for me personally, it's my beliefs. I believe God puts people in our lives for every moment.
Yeah.
And like those people were there for that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And they're still in my life. Like they're also part of like me joining.
Yeah.
Like I had one of my friends, I've been talking about it, and she was like, she just called me and she's like, you need to come, like, we need to talk after work today. And I sat down with her. She's like, you need to stop ignoring your heart and what you're being called to do and step into it.
Mm.
Quit letting the fear control you.
Yeah.
And like, everyone has fears, whether they admit it or not. We all face things that we're afraid of, and like losing my brother has created different paths of fear for me.
Yeah.
So just like different things that I battle or deal with, or, whatnot.
I think something that we had talked about earlier, kind of on the fear side, is, and I think we both kind of struggle with the same thing, which is after we saw what our brothers left, which was children and a wife and a family, a family that had many issues after that, and people's lives that were severely impacted negatively after that. I know that's something that we were talking about. So what does that kind of look like in your life right now? Just the fear of leaving people behind.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, we talked about earlier, like it's impacted me on a personal level more than I thought it would. And like I had talked to some people about it before I joined the military, because like for me personally, like with dealing with what happened to my brother, and like especially now, because I didn't know I was going to get stationed and live 20 minutes from my sister and my niece. But like I have my own personal issues with it, just with like not wanting to like leave that behind, like starting a family and then getting sent to war and then leaving that legacy of pain, I guess would be what I would call it. But that's something that I've been trying to like push through. I don't want to let that fear like control me. It's still there. It's like, it's just part of it. As long as I'm in the military, it's still going to be something that I'm going to, have to deal with. But like, just like for me, I mean, most people probably won't agree with it, but like to me, like it's easier to be the one that dies than the one left behind.
Yeah.
Because like once you die, like no one knows what happens. Like we have our religious beliefs and whatever, but the reality is like no one has any personal experience with what happens when we die. But like for me, I believe like if you're a believer, you go to heaven, so it's like paradise or whatever. So like to me, it's easier to be the one that dies than being the one left behind to deal with that, the fallout of the loss and the pain and the anger and the legacy.
I think that's the hard thing, kind of being on the receiving end of that and seeing how, I know in myself, I saw how negatively I've handled a lot of this, and I've seen how family and close friends have been affected by it and how it's just altered people's lives.
Mm-hmm.
And it always has the potential to alter it in a positive way. And I think I'm blind to that because I choose to be. And I see a lot of the negative, but it gives me the same fear. You know, I'm in the process of trying to work on building my own family. And it's like the paranoia that I have about providing and having that relationship and foundation built almost as if I'm planning for myself to die is such a heavy mindset to have. And I think part of it is one, we have to act in faith and be like, everything's going to happen the way that it's supposed to. But we also have to understand that it's other people's, like, we can't rob them of the opportunity to navigate that if we were, you know, if something was to happen to us, like that's those people's right to have the opportunity to navigate that.
That's their path.
That's their path. And it's something that just how me and you have learned to grow from this situation, whether that's been an up and a down or a back and a forth. It's either way. It's been a very impactful thing on our lives. Yes, it's hard, but I know for me, I've seen more positive gain now in hindsight for all things considered, even when things haven't worked out, even when relationships and certain people that were close to my brother have gone off the deep end. It's like it's a net positive because the majority of people, and especially the way my brother decided to carry himself, you know, same thing with Cameron, it was a very strong legacy that was left for people to navigate and handle themselves well, you know?
Yeah, I think like one of the main things that I still deal with it, but you know, is what I've learned is control. We like to have control. We want to have control of our lives. And like that's why we stay at the crappy job when we could get a better job. That's what I did. You know, it was a great place to work, best people ever, but it just wasn't, I wasn't going anywhere with the job, but I was comfortable. So it was secure. It was safety. That was my way of controlling my life. And like when my brother died, like that, there was no control. Like everything just spiraled. And that's where like my personal issues came up. That's where I had a lot of issues spiritually during that time, you know, but like, I feel like that loss bettered me in that, like, you know, it forged me into who God wanted me to be. It pushed me well beyond my comfort zone and my control. And like, honestly, if Cameron hadn't died, I probably wouldn't have joined the army because I didn't have that growth of like realizing, hey, like sometimes you just gotta step.
Yeah.
So like, I can honestly say that like, I probably would have just been right where I was before if he hadn't died, because my life wouldn't have gotten shaken up enough to make me face those things and to grow the way I did.
Yeah. I feel like the loss of somebody and any sort of severe trauma or grief, it can either be the nail that pins you down to where you're at in life, or it can be the springboard that gets you out of the rut that you're in.
Yeah.
And I think that's also how people grieve differently. And the judgment piece comes in is some people will be hammered down by choice. Some people will be hammered down by the circumstance. Some people will be springboarded into that very clear understanding of like, hey, life's short, life's fragile, and I need to live fearlessly and have faith because life's going to do whatever it's going to do with or without my permission type of situation.
Yeah, and it's funny now, like just thinking about it, because like Cameron was always trying to push me out of like that control, my comfort zone, and you know, like to take those steps and all that. And it's funny because like his death, like is literally like what pushed me.
The biggest lesson.
So like even after he died, like he's still helping me grow. So like I think that's the thing that like that legacy, like even when you're gone, you can still help people.
Yeah.
So I think that's like what we were talking about, like where you put that energy.
Yeah. I think that was a really kind of the last lesson that my brother taught everyone was to act in faith, you know, is he was always very spiritual. He definitely turned into it a lot more, you know, as times got darker, but not as like I'm scared of the dark times that are coming. It was more of like a very clear realization of like, okay, so this is the priority.
Yeah.
This is all that I can give to people now is the strength to act in faith. And that's a lot of what he did, you know, and like both of our brothers showcased that in different ways. Your brother was showcasing his faith and determination and fearlessness by going to war and signing that dotted line that said up and to my life, you know, which they took him up on that one.
Yeah.
And my brother, you know, same thing. He was able to see it from farther out but he said, this is coming to an end, and I can either make it about myself or I can leave a better legacy, a strength legacy, which he did. And he really challenged people, starting with me and then everyone else that was in his life at the time to step up to the plate and learn and be hardened and strengthened by this process. Like the sword coming out of the forge onto the anvil. It's like you can be strengthened by it or you can just be weakened by it. And the faith piece was huge, and that's kind of what I want to close on with this is what has the faith piece been prior to, how did faith look in your life prior to Cameron passing? Let's talk a little bit about the struggle right after, and then kind of how it's been that constant friend since. So talk me through, what did faith look like before?
So like before he died, I was involved with my church back home, and I was preaching. I worked in the preaching ministry at first I was an assistant, and then my friend Jana, she decided that there was more in that for me than what I was willing to I was comfortable with. So she was like, "Hey, guess what? You're going to be teaching next year." And I was like, "What do you mean I'm going to be teaching?" So I was like, she's another person in my life that kind of pushed me out of my comfort zone too. But so I started teaching in the preaching ministry, and I was a youth sponsor and all that stuff. And, just for me personally, the studying for those lessons and teaching it and seeing the kids grow and all that, spiritually helped me grow. I thought I was teaching them, but they were teaching me, and God was teaching me through them, And so I was pretty, I was happy in that. I miss that a lot. I don't have that anymore, which is okay, because that's, we go through seasons of life. So that was just that season, which I would like to, get back into it eventually. But so I was pretty active in the church. And then, when Cameron got killed, I kept going to church because that was my rock, that was what kept me going. And those people were there to support me. The fellowship, having the community is you have to have a community. You can't do it by yourself. You can think you can, but you're just going to self-destruct. I can tell you that right now. Because my first, just me personally, my personality, who I am, my first instinct is to go, just disappear, just be alone.
Same.
So it was a battle for me to continue to be in that fellowship, just because my instinct was to run and hide and just wallow in my own thoughts or whatever, but they didn't let me do that. In which I think each of us is called to see when other people in our community are in those positions and to not let them go down those paths. Kind of being your brother's keeper.
Yeah.
So you have to have those people that care about you enough and know you well enough to be able to call you out of those things. And I think that's where a lot of people fall short when it comes to fellowship in their church is, and I'm guilty of it too. We're all guilty of it, but not being real with those people so that they know what your problems are, where your weaknesses are, where you struggle, so that they can intervene when you're in those moments.
Yeah.
Because they can see it. Because if you don't know somebody, know them, then you can't see when they're in those, when you need to be there. You have to be able to be open with people, be weak with them, or not weak, but
transparent.
Yeah, transparent.
Yeah, I think that's something that I've really learned myself is, you talk about wanting to isolate. That's 100% what I did for, a couple of years, was just get as far away from the other people hurting as possible, because I don't want them to see my level of pain. I don't want them to see my specific step in the journey piece that I'm at. I don't want to have to be there for them because their pain, it's just it's a lot to handle. But
yeah, and you don't want to have to I don't know how to you don't want to confront it. You don't want to be confronted with where you're at in that grief process.
Yeah.
And by separating yourself from the other people grieving that, when no one knows your story or what you've going through, it's easy to just let it kind of hide in the background and just act like it's not there. But when you get around my mom, or my grandparents or my cousin, different people that were close to my brother, it's not, you can't hide it because they know you.
Yeah.
They see it, and they saw you growing up. They know who you are, what you're like, and they can see it in your eyes. you can't hide it from the people that truly know you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I was saying. Like, you got to have that community.
Yeah.
So like for me, like that was important. And then like I struggled a lot with like my prayer life because I realized like a lot of us can be very selfish and we aim our prayers towards things that aren't truly important. We should be, focused on things that are like that truly matter or are actually important. Be grateful for the things that we have instead of like, which I mean, everybody's different. Everyone does it, and it's not bad to like pray for things in life, like for good health or whatever. But so like I prayed a lot for whenever I got that phone call that my brother got shot, and then we got the phone call that they were cautiously optimistic and like he was gonna make it, and like to me that was answered prayer. So then when we got to Germany, they're like, nah, like there's no way, like he's gone already. And then coming to find out, like we found out later that before he even left Afghanistan, he was gone, and they knew it. So they basically lied to us to make us to keep us calm while we were traveling. So I had issues with that because then I was like, well, I prayed for that. Like, why didn't you? Like, why was it not real? Like, it was never real, but like it's like that false hope. Well, then I realized I was putting my hope in the wrong things. I was praying for the wrong things. And so like it took me a minute to really come to that realization. And like Christ talked about it a lot in the Bible. And he talks about prayer, like the things we should pray for. And like it's really easy for us to get so focused on us, our world, what's around us, and not like the big picture. So I mean, for me, like my prayer life that's where I got attacked big time.
Yeah. What has the faith journey looked like now that things have quote unquote normalized?
So like it just is my rock still. I mean, it's like my basis. Like when I went to OSA to basic training, it was big. Like because you're completely cut off from technology, the outside world. And at that time with COVID, like we were locked down. Like there was no like we didn't go out on the towns on the weekends on like the AIT portion or nothing. So like I had my Bible, and my mom would send me these little daily devotional things in the mail, and then like I got some other stuff from like Jana and some of my other friends, and so I spent a lot of time in the Word, like, and I grew a lot during that time, which I miss that honestly, having that like quiet, being separated from the world, like you're not distracted by all the flashing lights and the noises and the scare tactics and, like, oh, Ukraine, China, like I was focused on what truly mattered. So for me, that was a huge spiritual growth moment. And then like witnessing to other people, like I didn't think that I would be able to witness to people, but like it was just me living life, doing what I knew, and people would come and ask me, because I was reading my Bible and stuff. And I had some people that like went to church with me when I was there that never went to church.
Yeah. I think there's like two things there that stick out to me. One is like almost like that unashamed faith all of a sudden, and I know that's how it was for me. And it took a little while to get there. There was like a spike in it right after my brother passed. And then it was a couple years until it's come back where it's like that's now is the rock for going through and dealing with things. And I used to have like an insecurity about talking about it, especially with like other guys. And now I'm just like, this has been one of the biggest tools in my tool belt.
Yeah.
So I'd be a fool to not share it with you, especially if I care about you.
Well, you're called to if you actually believe it. The only thing is to share that light, to be a light to the world.
Yeah.
Like you hide it under a basket. What use is it?
I think the other thing too that you were saying is, having that peace with it and that growth. And that's like the hardest thing to learn how to emulate in just our normal life.
Yeah.
I've gone through a couple courses in the church that I'm at that like introduce very structured daily discipline. And it's like, yeah, huge growth happens and it's inconvenient or it's not. I guess it's just the way you look at it.
Yeah.
But I know for me, it's also been, I think that would be a huge advice that we'd both give to people is find a way to find seclusion within the word, and find that peace in that sounding board that has surpassed all of you and everyone else that you've ever known in time.
Yeah, and like one thing I will say is like you're not always gonna be in that moment. You're not gonna be in that place. Like I'm not in the word now as much as I was then, and I can see it, I can feel it, I know it. But like sometimes life, you just go with it. Like don't let it like you're no better or worse than you are in that moment than you are out of that moment. And that's Christ. Like that's the whole point of like why that's the whole reason we had to have Christ.
Yeah.
So like don't be hard on yourself. Like it's easy to be hard on yourself, especially when you're grieving, you're doing those things. Like what I was talking about earlier, like where I got angry and beat up that log. Well, I hurt my wrist. Well, then I was like, oh, you're stupid. Like, why'd you do that? Like, you shouldn't have let that anger, like, control you like that. Like, then I felt, bad for letting like those emotions control me. But you're human.
Yeah. I think that's a big piece of the faith is it gives you a better understanding of your own inability or capacity as a human, and it gives you grace, right? That's like the biggest thing that the faith in Christ can give you is grace to look back and forgive yourself for how you have or haven't handled things, and to give you a clear understanding of like, okay, I'm just human. Like that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then that grace overflows from you onto other people.
Yeah.
And that's what it took like in my life was understanding like to forgive myself for my own shortcomings. And then that gave me the space to start to forgive other people. But it's like the heart change had to happen internal before. And so like that'd be a huge advice I'd give to anyone that's going through a hard time in life, especially if it's grief based, is find grace in yourself and then you'll be able to give it to other people.
Yeah. And like another thing is like you're never like everyone thinks like, oh, I've fallen so far away when you get out of those habits or whatever. And like, how am I like there's no way I could ever make it back. Like you're no farther away now than you were when you were in those moments. Because like that's the grace. Like even at our best, we're still not worthy of it.
Yeah.
So like doesn't matter like where you're at, like you're still right where you were. We don't see it that way. We see it in like a physical world, like well, we've ran away, we've fallen short, we're still in the same place that Christ was. Like he's still with us.
Yeah, I think the best thing I learned through kind of pushing into my own faith and going through some of these more structured programs at my church was like to actually stop keeping score of what's physical, like the daily devotional. It's like, okay, that's a great habit to have.
Yeah, but you can miss a day.
But you can miss a day. And if you start beating yourself up over like, oh man, I shouldn't have slept in and then I had to go do this and that. And it's like faith should always be a priority on the daily list, but it's not about the works. Reading the Bible is still part of works. It's more about is your heart and spirit in the right place?
Yeah,
and if so, you can pray and find church in this conversation right now. You know what I mean?
Yeah, if you try to live a legalistic religion, you're gonna fail, and you're gonna like beat yourself up. Like I see it all the time. People like, oh, I do this and I do this and I do this, and I'm like, okay, but where's your faith? Like, I can do nice things and be a horrible person. Like I see it all the time. Like you have good dudes, and then you find out that they're not good dudes. They just want you to think they're good dudes.
Yeah.
Like so, just I don't know. It's just stop trying to be what you're not, and just accept what you are. Like that's the thing, and like that's the one thing I also learned is I am not my brother. Cameron was a beast. Like, I mean, he's just built different.
Built different, absolutely.
Yeah. Like I'm glad I joined. I don't regret joining, but it's not my thing. I'm gonna go back to being a mechanic. I did my time. I did my service. I learned a lot from it. Learned a lot about who I am, what I want out of life. Like for Cameron, it was everything. He was gonna do it till he died, and he did.
Yep.
So like there's nothing wrong with being you and not being something else. Everybody wants to look up to like a hero or like some like superstar. Like, yeah, it's good to strive for those things, and you should try to see if you are capable of those things. But when you fall short or come up short, like it's not a failure. You just found out like who you are. You learn more about yourself. Like my career in the army is not on the same level as like y'all's. But I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Because like I know I know who I am. Like I
Hmm.
know what I want. Like
Yeah.
I did doing my time, learning.
Yeah. Everyone has a different path.
Mm-hmm.
So let's kind of wrap it up with just, I kind of want to end it on like, what have we learned thus far, from our losing our brothers and just kind of what that developments look like. And I'm sure this answer will change every
Mm,
month and every year.
yeah.
But I know for me, some of the biggest things that stand out for kind of what I've learned personally is like, one, don't judge other people's grief. That's something that is just, it's going to be a hectic time. And it's about where can you find stability? I think
Mm,
faith is a big piece of that. Community is a big piece of that. So don't push away faith and don't
yeah.
push away community in the moment, would be some big lessons that I would push to people is when it's time to grieve, just know that it's going to look different. It's going to get messy, but find stability within that, whatever that
Mm-hmm.
looks like. And then don't judge what stability looks like to other people. Stability might be going to the gym. Stability might be, continuing to work. Stability might be, spending some time in the woods, whatever it may be. But find that consistency in an inconsistent time. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's like we were talking about, grief is going to shake up things ultimately for the positive if you allow it.
Mm-hmm.
So just know that this is the hard time, but if you navigate it and maintain yourself well, you're going to avoid a lot of the harder times that will come by your own decisions.
Yeah.
So I know for me, it's just been don't judge grief, push into community, push into faith, and just understand that your life is going to change, but it doesn't mean it has to be for the negative.
Mm-hmm.
Losing somebody close to you is a very hard thing. It's not the end of your life. So don't let it be. We have to live a life worth their sacrifice.
Yeah.
And so it's like, get through your grief and then charge yourself with the opportunity to live for them. So that's kind of the bigger things that stick out to me thus far. What about for you?
I think definitely community. Like that's the biggest thing I learned is like you can't like you no matter how hard you want to do it, like how bad you want to be able to do it alone, you want to be self sufficient or, strong person or whatever, like you gotta have people. But like I mean, for me, like I still deal with it, like we were talking, like with the whole like not wanting to leave behind somebody like control.
Hmm.
Like you can try to control your life and you're gonna end up living in a box.
Yeah.
And you're gonna live a life not worthy of living. Like all life is worthy of living, but like you should try to be what you're meant to be. And
Hmm.
like having control that, like you can lose your path trying to be secure to keep control.
Hmm.
Like you can just suffocate yourself trying to like keep control because you don't want to like the hypotheticals and the what ifs. Like the what ifs will be there every day. Like regardless of if you've lost somebody or not. We all have what ifs. Like, well, what if I do this? Like, what's gonna happen? Like, well, something's gonna happen regardless whether you move or not. So like, if you want control, then you might as well control which way you go for that first step and then see what happens. Like
Hmm.
I damn sure didn't know what I was getting into when I joined the army. You just get on an airplane.
Yep.
I didn't know I was gonna be stationed. I didn't know I was gonna get to spend 2 years of my life around my niece, watching her grow up. Like if I hadn't have like let that control go and took that chance, I would still be in Texas and I would have missed 2 years of seeing her grow up.
Mm.
So like I could have never dreamed that I would end up here and to like, spend birthdays and Christmas or Thanksgiving or Easter or Halloween, just the little things. Like it's been whatever happens with my career in the military, just having those 2 years, because they moved away, but like they're still, within driving range. But just those experiences, that opportunity to see her, well, and it's hard, being around her without, seeing, the void that, Cameron left. But for me, like just being a part of her life has made it worth whatever comes.
Mm.
Like, like with the surgery I'm going to have on my leg and all this stuff, like these are permanent injuries that I'll live with my whole life. it was worth it to see her grow up. I may not be able to spend her whole be around her whole life, but just that time I got made it worth it. So if I hadn't have took that chance and let off the reins and gave up some control of my life, the opportunities and the experiences that I've had, like I would have never had them.
Yeah, I think control is that human instinct that is non-existent. We don't control anything.
We're just gaslighting ourselves.
Mm-hmm. That's great advice, though. Honestly, is I think giving up control to the world and to God is an important part of being a man. Is you have to understand, yes, I have to put in the work every single day, and it is my responsibility to wake up and put in that work. But at the end of the day, everything is in faith at the end of the day. And the sooner you understand that, it's actually the easier that you can navigate the times where it calls on faith.
Yeah, it makes it easier.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I really appreciate you being on here. I appreciate all the advice and kind of talking through. I know this is a hard topic to get through, but you've been a good friend of mine, over the last couple of years, getting to know you after Cameron passed. And I've been very appreciative of that relationship, and I look forward to it continuing to grow.
Me too.
All right, man. I appreciate you.